Notebook 3. A Starless Sky. Genoa, 3 April 1666. Almost every day for 5 months I recorded the events of my journey, and now I don't possess the slightest trace of what I wrote. One notebook is still at Barinelli's place in Constantinople, and the other is in the monastery in Chios. I left it in my room there at daybreak, is still open at the last page for the ink to dry. I intended to go back to it before the evening to set down what happened in the course of that crucial day, but I never did get back to it. At last the day turned out to be even more decisive than I expected, and in a way quite different to what I had hoped. I am now separated from all the people I love, away from all my family and ill, but thank God, though fortune abandoned me with one hand, she picked me up again with the other. I may be stripped of everything, but if I am naked, it's in the way a newborn infant is naked on its mother's bosom. For I am reunited with my motherland, my mother's shore, my mother's city, Genoa. Every day since I got here, I've meant to start writing again, to tell the story of my journey and to describe my feelings, which alternate all the time between despondency and optimism. If I haven't written anything before today, it's mainly because of having lost my notebooks. I know my words are bound to end up in oblivion. Our whole existence borders on oblivion, but we need at least a semblance, an illusion of permanence if we are to do anything at all. How can I fill these pages? How can I go on searching for the right words to describe events and emotions if I can't come back in 10 or 20 years to revisit my past? And yet I still am writing and shall go on doing so. Perhaps the honor of mortals resides in their inconsistency. But to get back to my story, that morning in Chios, after a night of waiting, I resolved to go and find Marta at all costs. As I write that, I feel as if I am talking of a previous life. Since the woman I love went away, I've drifted into a kind of tainted afterlife. Her pregnancy must have developed, I suppose, but I wonder if I shall ever see the child that will be born of my seed. But I must stop complaining and pull myself together. I want the words I write to cure my melancholy, not to make it worse, so that I can tell my tale calmly, as I have vowed I would. Well then, after dozing for less than an hour in the guest house run by the monks in Cataractes, I awoke with a start and decided to go to Marta's husband's place. Hatim saw it was no use arguing with me, so he came too. A guard opened the door when I knocked, a huge fellow with a shaven head but a bushy beard and a mustache, who asked us what we wanted without letting us in. He spoke to us in a kind of pirate's Greek, without any of the usual politeness, and smiling and fingering the handle of a curved dagger. A few paces behind him stood two other characters cast in the same mold, not so tall as he, but with equally fierce expressions. I thundered at them in no uncertain manner, while Hatim remained cool in the background. Then with, in my opinion, more smiling and bowing and scraping than such louts deserved, he explained that we were from Gibelet, in their master's native country, and that he would no doubt be glad to know we were visiting his island. "He's not here," growled the one who'd opened the door, getting ready to shut it again, but Hatim persisted. "If he's away, perhaps we could pay our respects to his wife, who's a relation of ours," he began. "His wife doesn't see anyone when he's not here." And this time the door slammed shut. We just had time to jump out of the way. Brutish behavior, but in the eyes of the law it was I, the respectable merchant, who was in a false position, and the guard and his henchmen who were acting within their rights. Marta married this man, and as he hadn't been obliging enough to make her a widow, she was still his wife. I had no right to take her away from him, nor even to see her again if he didn't want me to. I should never have let her go and put herself in his power. But I still felt guilty however often I told myself she was only doing as she wished and there was nothing I could say to stop her. Even if I had made an error of judgment, though, and did feel I had to expiate it, that didn't mean I was resigned. I was prepared to pay for my mistake, but the price must be a reasonable one. There was never any question of abandoning Marta to that scoundrel's tender mercies forever. I'd got her into this trouble, and I must find a way to get her out of it. But how? With my thinking blurred by an almost sleepless night, I could see only one chink in my enemy's armor. His second marriage. That had been my first idea. Scare Sayyaf with the threat that his rich and influential father-in-law might learn the truth and so force him to come to terms. I could spend whole pages describing all the possible solutions I dreamed up, only to conclude that nothing would work. But I am still too weak, and I'm afraid of depressing myself again. As we approached the monastery guest house after our brief expedition, we caught sight in the distance of Drago's green shirt. He seemed to be waiting for us, hidden in the shadow of a wall. But when Hatim beckoned him over, he turned round and took to his heels. We were so surprised we made no attempt to follow him. We'd never have found him in the maze of village streets anyway. Suddenly, everything became clear to me. There had never been any second wife or influential father-in-law. Marta's husband had been manipulating us all the time. As soon as he found out we were looking for him, he'd sent Drago, one of his followers, to bait to the hook, lulling our suspicions by hinting at the possibility of an arrangement that would suit our purposes perfectly. So I'd let Marta go to see him, believing it wouldn't take her too long to get him to agree to her claiming that their marriage was never consummated and asking for it to be annulled. When he heard about this, one of the monks in the guest house, to whom we'd said nothing before so that our plans shouldn't leak out, roared with laughter. It was public knowledge that his neighbor from Gibelet lived with a trollop he'd picked up in some port in Candia. No resemblance whatever to any daughter of a local worthy in Chios. Now, what could I do? I remember spending the rest of that cursed day and part of the night not moving or eating, pretending to cudgel my Genoese merchant's brain for some supreme challenge to misfortune, while all I was really doing was mope and torture myself with self-reproach. At one point towards dusk, my clerk came to me and said in a voice at once apologetic and firm that it was time I faced the facts. There was nothing more to be done. Any fresh move would only make Marta's situation and our own more awkward and dangerous still. Hatim, I said, not even looking up, have I ever beaten you? My master has always been too kind. Well, if you dare advise me just one more time to go away and leave Marta to her fate, I'll give you such a beating you'll forget I was ever kind. In that case, my master had better beat me here and now, for until he stops defying Providence, I shan't stop trying to caution him. Get out of my sight! Anger sometimes acts as midwife to ideas. While I was huffing and puffing at Hatim and trying to silence him, a spark was suddenly kindled in my mind. Before long, it would confirm my clerk's worst prophecies, but at the time it struck me as very ingenious. My plan was to go and see the commanding officer of the Janissaries and tell him I was worried about certain matters. Sayyaf's wife was my cousin, I'd say, and I'd heard rumors that he'd strangled her. I know that was piling it on a bit, but murder was the only thing that would make the authorities intervene, and my fears weren't faint either. I really was afraid Marta might have come to some harm. Otherwise, why weren't we allowed to enter the house? The officer listened to my explanations, which were all the more convoluted for being expressed in a mixture of bad Greek and bad Turkish, with a few words of Italian and Arabic thrown in. When I mentioned murder, he asked if it was only a rumor or if I was sure of what I alleged. I said I wouldn't have come and disturbed him unless I was sure. Then he asked if I'd be ready to stake my head on it. That scared me, of course, but I was determined to carry the thing through, so instead of answering his dangerous question, I opened my purse, took out 3 hefty coins, and put them down on the table in front of him. He pocketed them with a practiced hand, put on his plumed hat, and ordered 2 of his men to accompany him. "May I come too?" I asked. I'd hesitated before asking. On the one hand, I didn't want to show Sayyaf how interested I was in what might happen to his wife, lest he find out what already happened between her and me. But on the other hand, the officer didn't know Marta, and they could have shown him any woman and told him that it was her and that she was perfectly well, and Marta wouldn't dare say anything if I wasn't there. "I oughtn't to take you with me," said the officer. "It might get me into trouble." He hadn't said no, and he was smiling meaningly and eyeing the spot on the table where I'd put the crucial coins. I undid my purse strings again and passed the additional present straight into his hand. His men looking on seemed neither surprised nor perturbed. The squad, 3 soldiers and me, set off. On the way, I saw Hatim making signs at me from behind a wall, but I pretended I hadn't noticed him. As we passed the guest house, I thought I saw a couple of the monks, together with their elderly maidservant, standing at one of the windows and apparently enjoying the show. We had no trouble entering Sayyaf's house. The officer hammered on the door and shouted an order. The bald giant opened the door and stood aside silently to let him in. After a moment, Sayyaf rushed up, all smiles and as anxious to please as if his dearest friends were paying him an unexpected visit. Instead of asking why we'd come, he lavished words of welcome on us, first on the Turk and then on me. He said he was delighted to see me again and called me friend and cousin and brother, showing nothing of any anger he might feel towards me. Since I'd last seen him in Giblet, he'd put on the weight without acquiring dignity. He was now a gross, bewhiskered pig in Turkish slippers. I'd never have recognized beneath his greasy fat, his ample robes, and his gold jewelry, the barefoot urchin who used to roam the streets in Giblet. Partly out of politeness and partly to carry off my role satisfactorily, I pretended to enjoy the reunion, submitting to his embraces and even ostentatiously reciprocating his cousinly greetings. This allowed me, as soon as we were installed in the sitting room, to ask the news of our cousin and his wife, Marta Khanum. I'd made the effort to speak in Turkish so that the officer would understand our conversation. Sayyaf answered that she was well despite the fatigues of the journey, explaining to the Turk that as a devoted wife she'd cross seas and mountains to be with the husband on whom heaven had bestowed her. "I hope she's not too tired," said I, "to come and say hello to her cousin." The husband looked embarrassed, and I could see in his eyes that he'd done something wrong. This impression was confirmed when he said, "If she feels better now, she'll get up and come to see you. Yesterday evening she couldn't hold her head up." I was so furious, anxious, and desperate that I leapt up, ready to seize the wretch by the throat. Only the sight of the official, the representative of law and order, held me back. But if it restrained my actions, it didn't moderate my words. I told Sayyaf and his crew just what I thought of them. I called the fellow himself all the names he deserved: lout, criminal, brigand, pirate, highwayman, cut-purse, cutthroat, runaway husband, unworthy to dust the shoes of the woman who'd entrusted herself to him, and I hoped he'd die impaled. He let me have my say without answering or protesting his innocence, but while I was working myself up I saw him sign to one of his henchmen, who then disappeared. At the time I paid no attention and went on even more loudly with my diatribe, mixing up the various languages and eventually getting so heated that the officer lost patience and told me to stop. He waited for me to obey and sit down again, then said to Sayyaf, "Where is your wife? I want to see her. Call her." "Here she is," replied the other, and Marta made her entrance, followed by the man who'd just left the room. It was then that I realized that her husband had tricked me yet again. He hadn't wanted her to appear until it suited him, that this That is after I made a fool of myself and given myself away. Of all the mistakes I've made, that's the one I still regret the most today. I think I'll rue it for the rest of my life. To tell the truth, I don't really know how far I gave myself away. Myself, her, our love, and our relationship. I don't remember all I may have said in my wrath. I was sure that this villain had killed her. Everything about his behavior seemed to prove it, and I no longer even heard the words streaming out of my mouth. He, on the other hand, listened to them calmly and haughtily, like a judge listening to the confessions of an adulteress. Forgive me, Marta, for all the harm I've done you. I'll never forgive myself. I can see you now, your eyes lowered, not daring to look either at your husband or at the man who'd been your lover. Penitent, distant, resigned, sacrificed. No longer thinking, I imagine, of the child you are carrying, just wishing this masquerade would end and your husband would take you back into his bed as soon as possible so that in a few months' time you can persuade him the child is his. I'll have been in your life for only one fatal moment, a moment of illusion and deceit and shame. But by God, woman, I loved you, and I shall go on loving you until my dying day. And I'll find no peace in this world or the next until I've atoned for the sins I've committed. At the time, in that house, that trap I'd gone to as a dispenser of justice only to find I was a culprit myself, I'd have liked to take back what I'd said somehow, so that you, Marta, wouldn't have to pay for my ranting. But I didn't say any more. I was afraid that if I tried to vindicate you, I'd only make matters worse, so I stood up and tottered out like an automaton without saying a word to you, without a farewell glance. As I was going back to the monastery, I caught a distant glimpse of the minaret in the Turkish quarter, and had a fleeting impulse to go there, rush up the stairs to the top, and jump off. But you don't kill yourself on a fleeting impulse. I am neither a soldier nor a murderer, and I have never got used to the idea of death. I've never had that kind of courage. I am afraid. Afraid of the unknown, afraid of being afraid when I'm about to jump, afraid of the pain when my head hits the ground and my bones break. And I wouldn't have wanted my family to be humiliated while Sayaf was celebrating, drinking, dancing, and making Marta clap in time to the music. No, I shan't kill myself, I muttered. My life's not over yet, but my journey is. The 100th name is lost, and so is Marta. I have no longer any reason, nor have I the strength to go on roving round the world. I'll go and pick up my nephews in Smyrna, and then go straight home to Giblet and wait there patiently, in my dear old curiosity shop, for this cursed year to end. I told my clerk who'd come out of the guest house to meet me of my intentions and asked him to be ready to leave before the end of the day. We'd spend the night in Chios town and set sail for Smyrna tomorrow. There, after saying goodbye to Maimun, Pastor Conan, and a few others, we'd embark on the first ship leaving for Tripoli. Hatim ought to have been delighted, instead of which he looked absolutely terrified. I didn't have time to ask why. "Hey, you, the Genoese!" a voice cried out behind me. Turning round, I saw the officer and his men. He beckoned me over. I went. "Down on your knees!" he yelled. There, in the middle of the street, with all those people already gathering behind walls and tree trunks and in windows so as not to miss the show. "You've made me lose face, you dog of a Genoese, and now it's my turn to humiliate you. You lied to me and made use of me and my men." "I believed every word I said to you. I swear." "Silence. You and your like think you can do anything you please and get away with it because the last minute your consul will come and save you. Well, not this time. No consul in the world is going to save you from me. When will you people realize this island doesn't belong to you anymore? It belongs now and forever to the Sultan Padishah, our master. Take off your shoes, sling them over your shoulders, and follow me." The road was lined with sniggering beggars and loafers. Our wretched procession set off in a curious atmosphere that seemed to entertain everyone, including the Janissaries, though not Hatem. Quibs, ululations, more laughter. I tried to console myself by thinking I was lucky all this wasn't taking place in the streets of Giblet. No one here knew me, and I'd never have to meet the eyes of somebody who'd seen me being humiliated in this way. When we reached the Janissaries' headquarters, my hands were tied behind my back and I was put into a sort of shallow pit hollowed out in the floor. It was so small I couldn't have moved even if they hadn't tied me up. After an hour or two, I was sent for, my hands were untied, and I was taken before the officer. He seemed to have calmed down by now, though he was still pleased at the trick he'd played on me. He lost no time in hinting that we might strike a bargain. "I am not sure what I ought to do with you," he said. "I should really have you charged with false accusation of murder. That would mean flogging, prison, and even worse if we add adultery." He paused, and I was silent too. My protestation of innocence wouldn't have convinced anyone, even my own sister. I was guilty of false accusation of murder and of adultery, but the officer had said he hadn't yet made up his mind what to do with me. I waited for him to go on. "I could have pity on you, turn a blind eye to all you've done, and just deport you to your own country. I'd be very grateful." I really meant I was prepared to do a deal. The officer was venal, but I needed to behave as if I myself were the goods for which the price had to be assessed. I won't deny that I felt better when things reached this stage. Confronted with the law, whether of men or of heaven, I was helpless. But when it came to fixing a price, I had words and to spare. God had made me wealthy in a land of injustice. If I made the powerful envious, I also had the wherewithal to satisfy their greed. We agreed on a price, though I am not sure agreed is the word. In fact, the officer asked me to put my purse on the table. I did so without demur and held out my hand, as the merchants usually do when they want to seal a bargain. He hesitated for a moment, then shook my hand, wearing a lofty smile. Immediately afterwards he left the room, and his men came in, tied me up again, and took me back to my cell. It was daybreak, though I hadn't slept, when they came and blindfolded me, wrapped me up in a sort of canvas shroud, loaded me into a wheelbarrow, and pushed it and me along what felt like steep paths to a place where they unceremoniously tipped me out onto the ground. I guessed I must be on the beach because the ground was soft and I could hear the sound of waves. Then I was hoisted onto a man's back and put on a boat as if I were a bale or a trunk. Genoa, 4 April. I am preparing to take up the thread of my story again, sitting on the terrace of a friendly house, breathing in the scent of spring, lending an ear to the gentle noises of the city and to the honeyed tongue that is the language of my heart. And yet in the midst of this paradise I weep when I think of her, far away, a prisoner, heavy with child, guilty of having wanted to be free and of having loved me. It wasn't until some time after I was on board the ship that I found out where I was going. I'd been laid down deep in the hold, and the captain had been ordered to keep me blindfolded until the coast of Rios was out of sight. He obeyed his orders to the letter, or almost, for when he allowed me up on deck, you could still make out the tops of the mountains. Some sailors even pointed out to me the outline of a castle in the distance, saying it was called Polonio or Apollonio. Anyhow, we were a long way away from Cataractes and heading west. Strangely enough, the way in which the authorities had deported me won me the sympathy of the captain, a Calabrian of about 60, with long white hair whose name was Domenico. He was as thin as a stray dog and always swearing by my ancestors or threatening to hang his crew or throw them to the fishes. But he took such a fancy to me that he told me about his misdeeds. His ship, a brigantine, is called the Charybdis. He'd put in at the Cataractus, where the creek is used mainly by fishing boats, because engaged in a highly lucrative form of smuggling. I guessed straight away that what was involved was mastic. Chios is the only place in the world where it's produced, and the Turkish authorities allow it to be used only in the Sultan's harem, where it's fashionable for the noble ladies to chew it from morning till night to whiten their teeth and perfume their breath. The farmers on the island who grow the precious tree, Pistachia lentiscus, which is very like the pistachio tree we have in Aleppo, have to hand the mastic over to the authorities for a fixed price, but those who produce surplus try to sell it on their own account, though if they are found out, they may spend a long time in prison, in the galleys, or even be put to death. Despite this, the desire for profit has led to a flourishing contraband trade in which customs officers and other representatives of the law often dabble. Captain Domenico boasted to me that that he was the wiliest and boldest of all the smugglers. In the course of the last 10 years, he said, he'd been to Chios no fewer than 30 times to take on the forbidden cargo and never once been caught. He told me plainly that he rewarded the Janissaries generously for looking the other way, which didn't surprise me after the way they deported me. For the Calabrian to defy the Sultan in his own territory and deprive him of the dainties intended for his favorites was not only a source of income but also an act of bravura, almost a sacred duty. In the course of our long evenings at sea, he regaled me with detailed accounts of all his adventures, especially those during which he had almost been caught. These made him laugh more than the others. As he spoke, he took sips of brandy to help him remember how frightened he'd been. I was amused by the way he drank, straight out of a skin flask that he kept within arm's reach, first holding it poised high in the air with his mouth clamped to the opening like someone about to play oboe. Sometimes, as when he spoke of countless tricks the farmers got up to evade the Ottoman laws, he taught me something I didn't know before. At other times he told me nothing I didn't know already. I forget if I mentioned earlier that our family, before going back to Giblet, had settled in Chios and gone in for the mastic trade. All that ended in my great-grandfather's time, but the memory of it has survived. The Embriachi forget nothing and deny nothing. Their lives made up variously of military exploits and trade, distinctions and misfortunes add up as the rings do year by year in the trunk of an oak tree. The leaves die every autumn and occasionally a branch is broken, but the oak remains itself. My grandfather used to tell me about the mastic in the same way as he told me about the Crusades, explaining how the bark of the mastic tree is tapped to extract the precious drops, and reproducing for my benefit, though he had never seen a pistachia lentiscus himself, the motions his own grandfather had taught him. But to return to my smuggler captain and his dangerous trade, his best customers were the ladies of Genoa. Not that they were more concerned about the sweetness of their breath or the whiteness of their teeth than the ladies of Venice, Pisa, or Paris. But Chios belonged to Genoa. For a long time, habits tend to persist, and although the Turks took the island 100 years ago, our ladies have never been willing to give up their mastic. Nor have their husbands. It's a point of honor for them to get hold of the stuff as a sort of revenge on fate and on the Sultan who embodies it. Has moving your jaws up and down really become a demonstration of pride? Given the price the ladies pay for their gum, their munching reveals their rank more surely than the most costly jewels. How ungrateful of me to be so flippant, when it's because of the ladies and their precious mastic that I am back on this terrace in Genoa instead of wasting away in a Turkish dungeon. Munch on, ladies. Munch on. The captain didn't want to call in at any of the Greek islands in case the Turkish customs man would take it into their heads to come on board. He made straight for Calabria and an inlet near Catanzaro, his native town, where he told me he'd sworn to make an offering to his patron saint every time he returned from the Levant safe and sound. I went with him to San Domenico's, having even more reason to pray than he. Kneeling there in the dim, cold church amid the smell of incense, I muttered a half-hearted and not too generous prayer. If I got Marta back, together with the child she's carrying, I would name it Domenico if it was a boy, and Domenica if it was a girl. As we sailed up the boot of Italy to Genoa, we put in at 3 more ports to shelter from storms and to take on water, wine, and provisions.